It was the third day of my drive from Chicago to Los Angeles when I saw the first sign for Amboy. The heat had been building steadily since Flagstaff, that dry, oppressive desert heat that makes the air shimmer above the asphalt and your skin feel like parchment. My rental car's AC was fighting a losing battle, whining like a dying insect that I was alone, which was the point of the trip, but the solitude was starting to curdle from peaceful to heavy. Next to me in the passenger seat she'd occupied for the last 6 hours, was Chloe from the hostel in Albuquerque. We'd shared a pot of terrible coffee that morning, and she'd mentioned she was hitching her way to the coast. Her smile was a dangerous thing, wide and a little crooked, with a knowing glint in her hazel eyes that suggested she was aware of the effect it had. I'd offered her a ride before my better judgment could kick in. It was a stupid, potentially dangerous thing to do, picking up a stranger in the desert, but the loneliness was a physical ache in my chest, and she had this way of looking at me that made me feel solid, seen. Amboy, she read the sign aloud, her voice a low, pleasant rasp from the dry air. What's in Amboy? A crater, I think, and not much else, I said, my eyes flicking from the road to her. She had her feet up on the dash, her sandals discarded on the floor mat, her toes were long and slender, painted a chipped, dusty red. A thin silver ring encircled the second toe on her right foot. I found myself staring at the delicate bones of her ankles, the way the strap of her sandal had left a faint, pink impression on her instep. I had a sudden, inappropriate image of tracing that line with my finger. I shook my head, focusing back on the endless, bleached-out highway. Let's stop, she said, not a question. I'm dying for a real bathroom, and this place sounds apocalyptic. I love apocalyptic. I couldn't argue, the emptiness was getting to me too. The landscape was a brutalist painting. Flat, cracked earth, scrub brush, and jagged, rust-colored mountains in the distance. It felt less like a place and more like an absence. 20 minutes later, we rolled into what was left of Amboy. It was a ghost town in the making. A single, dusty road, a closed-down diner with its sign bleached white by the sun, a post office that looked like it hadn't seen a letter in a decade, and Roy's Motel and Cafe, its iconic sign standing sentinel over a parking lot of broken asphalt. The place was silent, save for the whine of the wind and the ticking of my car's engine as it cooled. No bathrooms, Chloe sighed, hopping out of the car and stretching her arms over her head. The movement pulled her thin, white tank top tight across her chest, and I couldn't help but watch the shape of her, the way her back arched. She caught me looking and gave me that crooked smile again. Guess I'll find a bush. Don't peek. I laughed, a dry, nervous sound. While she wandered off behind the skeletal remains of a gas station, I leaned against the hot hood of the car and lit a cigarette. The silence was profound. It was the kind of silence that felt like a physical pressure on the eardrums. I scanned the desolation, and that's when I saw it. Tucked between the motel office and a collapsed shack was a row of 4 payphones. They were the old, heavy-bodied kind, with rounded tops and metal cords. They looked utterly alien in the age of the smartphone, relics from a forgotten world. What were they even doing here? Who were they for? The dust around them was undisturbed. Chloe came back, brushing dirt from her tight, faded jeans. Find anything interesting? I nodded toward the phones. Those? Weird, she said, coming to stand beside me. Her arm brushed against mine, and a jolt, part electricity, part warmth, went through me. She smelled like sun and dust and a faint, clean sweat. You think they still work? Doubt it. Probably disconnected decades ago. Only one way to find out. She walked toward them, her hips swaying in a lazy, hypnotic rhythm. I followed, my curiosity piqued, but also a strange, low-level anxiety beginning to hum in my veins. The phones were a sorry sight. The glass on the first one was cracked into a spiderweb pattern. The second was missing its handset entirely. The third was coated in a thick layer of grime and what looked like old, dried bird shit. But the fourth, the one on the very end, was pristine. Its chrome was shiny, the black plastic of the handset looked new, and the cord was coiled neatly on its hook. It was as if it had been installed yesterday. Spooky, Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. I reached out and lifted the handset. It was cool and surprisingly heavy. I expected dead air, the hollow silence of a disconnected line. Instead, I heard a dial tone. A clear, strong humming dial tone. No way, I said, holding it out so Chloe could hear. Her eyes widened. Who do you call? There's no one here. It was a stupid idea, a pointless exercise. But the absurdity of it, the sheer anachronism, was compelling that I pulled my wallet from my back pocket, fished out an old, dog-eared business card. My therapist from 3 years ago, Dr. Albright. A number I'd memorized during a very dark time, a number I hadn't dialed in over a year. My thumb hovered over the keypad. This was a landline number. Payphones didn't need area codes for local calls, but this was Chicago. This was insane. I punched in the number anyway. 312-555-0178. I heard the clicks and whirs of a connection being made. Then a ring. 1.2. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't possible. On the third ring, a voice answered. It was faint, distorted, layered with a hiss of static, but unmistakable. It was Dr. Albright. Michael? The voice said, tinny and distant. Michael, is that you? I was just thinking about you, about your mother's funeral. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The funeral, the gray, sleeting rain. My father's face, a mask of stone. Me, 16 years old, standing at the edge of the grave, feeling nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness. The memory was a black hole in my mind, a place I never went. Who is this? I managed to stammer. The static intensified, swallowing the voice. The lilies? You hated the smell of the lilies? The voice crackled, and then the line went dead with a sharp, final click. I stood there, the dead handset pressed to my ear, my heart hammering against my ribs. The desert heat was gone, replaced by an inner cold. What happened? Chloe asked, her playful tone gone. You look like you've seen a ghost. I slowly hung up the phone. The chrome was beaded with condensation from my palm. Wrong number, I lied, my voice rough. Just a wrong number. But it wasn't that. It was Dr. Albright's voice, and he'd mentioned the one memory I worked the hardest to keep buried. The lilies. My God, the lilies, their cloying, sweet, funereal scent had filled the house for weeks afterward. I had hated it. I'd never told him that I was sure of it. Let's get out of here, I said, turning away from the phone. This place is giving me the creeps. Chloe didn't argue. We got back in the car, the silence between us now thick and uncomfortable. I started the engine and pulled back onto Route 66, driving faster than I should have, the ruined town shrinking in my rearview mirror. I tried to chalk it up to coincidence, a bizarre fluke. A crossed wire. A prank. But the payphone was in the middle of nowhere, and the memory it had unearthed was too specific, too private. We drove for another hour, the incident hanging in the air between us. Chloe dozed off, her head lolling against the window. I watched the way her dark hair fell across her cheek, the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest. Normally, the sight would have stirred something in me, a low thrum of desire. Now, it just felt distant, like watching a movie. My mind was back in that graveyard, the cold seeping through the soles of my shoes. We stopped for the night in a bleak little motel in Ludlow, a place that made Amboy look metropolitan. The room had 2 double beds, a stained carpet, and a window unit that rattled like it was full of marbles. We ordered a greasy pizza and ate it on my bed, the cardboard box between us. You've been quiet, Chloe said, wiping grease from her chin with the back of her hand. Her lips were glossy from the pizza, and for a fleeting second I imagined leaning over and tasting them, losing myself in a simple physical sensation to drive out the cognitive chill. Long drive, I mumbled. It was that phone, wasn't it? She pressed. What really happened? I looked at her. The concern in her eyes seemed genuine. The need to tell someone, to externalize the weirdness, was overwhelming. So I told her about the dial tone, about dialing my old therapist, about the voice, the static, the mention of the funeral and the lilies. She listened, her pizza forgotten. When I finished, she didn't laugh or call me crazy. She just nodded slowly. Memory is a weird thing, she said. Maybe you've just been thinking about it more lately. Your mind played a trick on you. Maybe, I said, wanting to believe her. Later, after the lights were out, I lay in the dark, listening to the rattle of the AC and Chloe's soft, even breathing from the other bed. The moon was bright, casting a silver rectangle on the floor. I could see the shape of her under the thin sheet, the curve of her hip, the long line of her leg. The lust was there, a dull, persistent ache, but it was tangled up with the dread. My thoughts kept circling back to the phone, to the sound of that voice in the static that I felt a compulsive, gnawing need to go back. To try it again. To see if it would happen again. It was insane. It was the middle of the night in the Mojave Desert. I must have fallen into a fitful sleep, because the next thing I knew, a sliver of pale, pre-dawn light was cutting through the blinds. Chloe was still asleep, one arm thrown above her head, the sheet tangled around her waist. I got up quietly, dressed, and scribbled a note saying I was going for coffee. I didn't go for coffee. I drove back to Amboy. The desert at dawn was a different world, washed in shades of violet and rose, the air still and cool. The town looked even more forlorn in the soft light. I parked in the same spot, my tires crunching on the gravel. The silence was back, deeper now, waiting. I walked straight to the row of payphones. The first 3 were as derelict as before. The 4th was still pristine. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This was stupid, this was dangerous. But the pull was magnetic. I picked up the handset. The dial tone was there, humming its low, steady note. My hands were shaking. I didn't have Dr. Albright's card this time. My mind was a blank. Then another number surfaced from a deeper, darker place. My college girlfriend, Sarah. Our breakup had been messy, brutal. I'd said things I could never take back. It was another memory I kept locked away, a source of deep, lingering shame. My finger trembled as I pressed the numbers. 773-555-0921. The connection was faster this time. The static was there, but quieter. A ring. Then her voice, young and bright, the way it sounded sophomore year. Mikey, she said, and the old nickname was a punch to the gut. I was just remembering that fight, the one in the rain. You told me I was suffocating you. The memory flooded back, vivid and painful. A cold, torrential downpour on campus. Her crying, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. Me screaming, "You're suffocating me. I can't breathe." The way her face had crumpled, the sound of her sobs swallowed by the rain. I'd felt powerful in that moment, and then immediately, eternally ashamed. Sarah, I started, but the static swelled. That you were right, you know, her voice crackled, fading. I was so afraid of being alone. The line went dead. I slumped against the phone booth, my forehead pressed to the cool metal. I was sweating, my t-shirt sticking to my back. This wasn't a fluke, this was real. This phone, this impossible phone in the middle of the desert, was connecting me to my past, to the people tied to my most painful memories, and it was altering them, shifting the perspective, adding details I'd forgotten or suppressed. Sarah thought she was suffocating me. She'd admitted in all the years since, I'd carried the full weight of that cruelty, believing it was entirely my fault. Now, the burden felt different, lighter, and yet somehow more complex. The memory was no longer a simple monument to my failings. It was a messy, shared tragedy. I drove back to the motel in a daze. Chloe was awake, sitting on the steps outside our room, sipping a cup of vending machine coffee. "Find any coffee?" she asked, a knowing look in her eye. I shook my head. "Drove to Amboy." She didn't seem surprised. "And?" I told her everything. The second call, Sarah's voice, the altered memory. This time her skepticism was gone. She just listened, her expression unreadable. "We have to go back," she said when I finished. It wasn't a suggestion. "Why?" It's messing with my head, Chloe." "Exactly," she said, standing up. Her body was tense, alert. "Don't you see? This is a chance to fix things. To understand." The rest of the day was a blur. We checked out of the motel, but instead of heading west toward L.A., we drove back to Amboy and booked a room at Roy's Motel. It was surreal. The place was officially closed, but a taciturn old man in the cafe, who may or may not have been the mythical Roy, took my cash and handed me a key to room 109. The room was a time capsule from the 1950s. Cracked linoleum, a chenille bedspread, a television with rabbit ear antennas. It smelled of dust and ancient cigarettes. We were trapped there now, by my obsession and her unsettling fascination. The payphone stood just outside our window, a silent, malevolent shrine. The hours dragged, the desert sun beat down. We barely spoke. The sexual tension that had been a constant hum between us had evaporated, replaced by a new, more potent energy, a shared dread. I found myself watching her not with desire, but with a kind of clinical curiosity, the way the sweat dampened the hair at her temples, the nervous tap of her painted toenails on the floor. She was just as caught in this as I was. As evening fell, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple, I knew I had to do it again. The compulsion was a physical itch under my skin that I had to know how deep this went. "I'm going out," I said, my voice hoarse. Chloe just nodded from where she sat on the bed, her knees drawn up to her chest. "Be careful." The third phone call. This one was to my father. Our relationship had been a cold war since my mother's death, a series of strategic silences and carefully worded letters. The last real conversation we'd had was the night I told him I was dropping out of pre-med. His disappointment had been a physical presence in the room. I dialed his old landline number, the one from the house I grew up in. The static was heavier this time, a roaring ocean in my ear. Then his voice, not the frail old man's voice he had now, but the strong, stern baritone of my childhood. "Michael." "No hello, just my name. I was thinking about when you quit baseball. 10th grade. My stomach dropped. Another failure. I'd been a good pitcher, but I'd quit abruptly, telling him I hated it. The truth was, I'd developed a case of the yips that I couldn't throw a strike to save my life. The fear of humiliation was worse than his disappointment, or so I'd thought. "I saw you," his voice crackled through the static. "Practicing in the backyard, you couldn't find the strike zone, your hands were shaking." I leaned against the booth, my legs weak. That he'd known. All this time I thought he just saw me as a quitter, that he'd known I was terrified. "I should have said something," the voice continued, fraying at the edges. "I should have told you it was okay to be afraid. Instead I got quiet, like I always do." The line dissolved into a burst of pure white noise, so loud I had to pull the receiver away from my ear. When I put it back, it was dead. That I stood there for a long time, the handset dangling from my fingers. The memory of that summer was rewriting itself in my mind. The